Hi everyone, it's Tim. So the last couple videos I made generated a lot of comments. I read them. I wasn't replying. I kind of knew what kind of comments they would generate. And I see some polarization happening where some people say, "Oh, I'm a victim," and other people saying, "Hey, you accepted responsibility for the project, so bonuses are icing. You don't deserve them." I get it. But what I want to talk about today, and this is going to sound ironic coming from a colorblind person, but I want to remind people that things aren't as black and white in these stories as you make them out to be. These are real stories about real people. They're not, literature. It's not philosophical parables. These are real people trying to make decisions in the moment. Sometimes they make good ones, sometimes they make bad ones. But trying to kind of force this into a hero villain thing, that's not the right way to look at it. I'm trying to give you guys insight into game development. But I think a lot of people want to turn this into a story with heroes and villains. So let me go back and give you some nuance of some of these things. So, yes, I think Brian Fargo acted badly sometimes, but he also acted really nicely sometimes. And I mentioned that in the story. He did really love Fallout when he played it. He encouraged other people at the company to play it. He really wanted me involved in Fallout 2. Those are all good things. But I will also point out that when you start up Fallout 1 and it says Brian Fargo presents, he didn't ask for that to be in there. That was something we put in. I asked Leonard and he said he or Jason had the idea. He couldn't remember which. But when they were doing the credits, they put it Brian Fargo presents. Why? We had just spent 3 years and $3 million of Brian's to make this game that we loved. And we had tons of fun making it. Yes, it was hard work, but we had so much fun. And we kind of wanted to say thanks for all that. In fact, when Brian first saw it, he didn't like it. He's like, "Oh, you should take that out." And we're like, "No, we're leaving it in. We wanted it to be there. No one told us to put it there. We put it there." Now, of course, years later, it struck me as odd that people looked at that and went, "Oh, Brian must have created this game." And I try to tell people, well, he created it in the same way that if I go to a restaurant and order a meal and pay for it, I created that meal. It's like I said what I wanted, and I might have even said how I wanted my steak done and that I wanted the potatoes mashed, but I didn't make it. But he did pay for it. And we were thankful for the time and the space for us to work in. And I think that was great. Same thing with Fergus. Yes, Fergus and I have butted heads over the years. He's butted heads with other people. I've butted heads with other people. Making games is as much art as science. So you're going to have creative disagreements. But let me tell you something. When we hit that stage in Fallout where we discovered that a lot of work wasn't done, and we had a few months before that deadline in September, Fergus mobilized people in his department from other groups to come and help us. And he himself rolled up his sleeves and worked as well. Late hours with all the rest of us. He worked on areas. He wrote dialogues. He put in items and loot tables. And, it was a all hands on deck kind of thing. And Fergus was one of the hands on deck. And that was impressive to see. I don't recall ever seeing another director do that there. And it was impressive. I've made bad decisions, and I've talked about them in previous videos. Bad decisions on Temple. I may be doing a whole video about bad decisions I made in Arcanum. There were a lot. I've talked about the bad business decisions that led to Troika being shut down, and people lost their jobs, their livelihood, and that's on me. So when I talk about this, I just want people to remember that people make decisions, and they're not always good. Sometimes they're bad. The only thing I wish people would do is own up to making their bad decisions, which doesn't always happen. I try to own up to mine. I try to do better in subsequent games. Didn't always succeed, but I tried. In fact, that was a little side note. When I arrived at Obsidian, which was supposed to be a temporary job in 2011, it became permanent. The one thing I mentioned when I got hired was I don't want to be a lead. I don't want to have a lead role. I just let me be a senior program, maybe do some design on the side. I was there just a few months before someone said, "Hey, we want to make you a strike team lead on combat." And I'm like, "No." And I just said no. And they're like, "But it would help." I was on South Park. It would help. No. I was asked multiple times to be a game director before I said yes. Just because I've done it, it's great, but the responsibility is heavy, and I know that I don't always make the right decisions. The reason I ended up doing Outer Worlds, there were a lot of reasons, but two big ones were, one, I got to work with Leonard Borarsky again, which is important. And two, I was looking back on my career and going, Fallout was special. Fallout was amazing. And I had met enough people at Obsidian, enough of the developers there, and I wanted them to have that experience. I wanted them to work on something that had that amazing vibe to it. You know, you're working on it and you can kind of feel it's going to be something special, and you're having fun doing it. And I even said that about 2 years into the 3 years, maybe 2.5. I remember we were in a team meeting. We had a stand up once a week, just like 15 minutes. And I said, I hope Outer Worlds turns into your Fallout. I hope that you recognize that you're enjoying doing this, and that later you're proud to point to it on your resume and go, I did that. And that 25 years later, people are still talking about this game that hopefully becomes a series of games. And that was important to me to basically know that there's something in someone's career that you could help foster that would make them like, wow, all this hard work was worth it. So before I summarize, let me talk about all these stories. Of course, from my point of view, there's a lot of subjectivity, but I did take extensive notes. These, I always refer to them and go, I want to make sure that the things I'm talking about, I'm not going to try to embellish, and I've got the dates roughly right. Not perfect. Nobody is. You could probably get 100 different perspectives on what happened on these stories. But I want to put even that subjectivity into perspective. So I've now been in the industry for 4 decades. There are 3 very objective numbers that you can compute, you can calculate for any game. And that is its budget, its sales, and its reviews. Across my career, there has been absolutely no correlation between those numbers. Let me explain what I mean. I've done games with small budgets that got great reviews, but didn't sell that well. I've done games with small budgets that got okay reviews, that sold okay. I worked on a game with a huge budget that came out and had okay reviews, but didn't do well. I had a game with a pretty good budget that had really good reviews and sold millions. What am I saying? There's really no way to calculate ahead of time the success of a game. Throwing out big budget at it isn't going to necessarily make it good. There's really no way to know. And it kind of factors into what I'm saying here. There's a lot of nuance going on in here. In these stories about people want to make into hero and villains, people want to compare games and rank them. This game is definitely better than that one. Well, this one sold more. Well, this one reviewed higher. There's a lot of subjective stuff going on here. And again, I think it's ironic that a colorblind person is telling you, you can't look at this so black and white. And that's just what I want people to walk away from these stories with. You're learning what game development is like and the whole game industry. Don't be 100% sure that you have the entire story. And also don't base the entire opinion you have, the people involved in these stories, on these stories. Yes, there are people who did good stuff and bad stuff. And maybe some people did more good than bad. But they all did good and bad. And depending on the effects of those decisions, there are people who loved working with me, people who didn't love working with me. There are people who loved working with Fergus and Fargo, and people who did not love working with them. That's true for everybody in the industry. So what I'm hoping you do is take away some lessons about game development and some insight into game development from these stories, and not so much, oh, well, these are the bad guys, these are the bad actors, and these are the good actors. So, there. A lesson in seeing nuance from and not black and white from a colorblind old developer.